Welcome to Deakin. Welcome to Deakin Prime. It is our great pleasure to host you here today. My name is Simon Han. I'm the CEO of Deakin Prime. We're very pleased to have back by popular demand Stuart Taylor. He filled the room last year with a wonderful presentation, and notwithstanding, he recently told me that I could have given him a better introduction last time. We've had him back, and I thought he was joking, but he just gave me a little pep talk about giving him a better introduction again, so I think he might be serious. So I'll do my best. But as I said, very pleased to be welcoming Stuart back. He's going to talk to us about creating sustainable, high-performing teams. And high-performing teams, it's one of those phrases that sounds good, but why do we need them? Why do we need high-performing teams? And there's two key elements for me. And one is undoubtedly about being able to constantly adapt to a fast-changing and uncertain world. We're constantly being faced with disruption, this concept of adaptive change. And organisations need high performance, and that draws on its people working together, and it needs to be able to sustain that. The other element is an individual one, and it's around reward and intrinsic motivation. And I'll try and avoid football analogies because I appreciate not everyone's a sporting fan or an AFL nut like me, but if you asked any football player whether they prefer to win the Brownlow medal, so for the best individual performance, or be part of a winning premiership team, what would their preference be? So what would that be? Premiership, yeah, every day of the week. And the reason that is it's that sense of shared achievement and accomplishment. And I think that's what we get when we work in a high-performing team, when we have results and success, we feel that and we can share it. And it very much contributes to being, in a constructive workplace where we all aspire to. So today Stuart's going to address how we build capacity and competency to maintain a performance edge and do it sustainably and with agility, and to do it by building our resilience, which is his background. So Stuart's worked with Deakin Prime for over 8 years now. We've had a long association. He leads the Resilience Institute in Australia and is an experienced management consultant with a focus on resilience, stress and cognition, and has a really diverse background and qualifications in psychology, finance, IT and engineering. So I think you've sort of crossed the spectrum there a little bit, Stuart. But it brings a breadth of perspective to client analysis and situations. Prior to joining the Resilience Institute, Stuart was with KPMG Management Consulting and then worked as a senior leader in a global corporation. Stuart's life was completely turned upside down in 2002 when he was diagnosed with brain cancer. And this has led Stuart to embark on a journey back to physical, emotional, cognitive and spiritual health, which has shaped his approach to both business and life and work with the Resilience Institute. He's a published author. In 2013, Stuart published his first book, Assertive Humility, Emerging from the Ego Trap, which I would recommend, I have read and I would recommend to all of you. So without further ado, and Stuart, you can let me know afterwards how I did with the introduction, but pleased to invite Stuart to the stage. Thank you.
As far as I'm going. Welcome to our session to have a conversation around this topic around high performance, more usefully, sustainable high performance. And I think the first test that each of you were asked to pass was quite a simple one. That was to do the online diagnostic test. Can I have a bit of show of hands? Who managed to pass that test? Not actually pass the test, but actually do quite a few of you. So those that didn't, you can still do it after this session. The tool will still be open for you. However, when we are debriefing that in the session a little bit later, perhaps push-ups would be useful to do. We'll only go for about 5 minutes, so 5 minutes of push-ups I think would be a nice thing for you to do. Welcome. I thought I'd start the session by introducing you to the children in my family. And a few years ago we headed off to the Melbourne show, and $100 later we came out of it with a fantastic day. How many emotions can you count in this picture? My daughter Claire, what's her emotion? This is terror, get me out of here, I'm not enjoying myself, please look after me. Her eldest brother Joshua, bottom right. Not sure. I should be having fun. I don't think I am. What did Josh say when he got off the roller coaster? Yeah, let's go again. Josh, I think we need to review the evidence. And Llewellyn, his younger brother, absolute joy. In fact, that's how he lives his life. But if you look at the image, this is a beautiful example of resilience. How is it that one event can have such a different impact on 4 people? And in part, that's what we're here to talk about. How do you, as an individual, as a team, as an organisation, sustainably hold this place of high performance? Really is the essence of where we are going. I do compliment Simon for his wonderful introduction. He really did step it up a bit this year. You obviously actually put some effort into it, I think, and maybe even planned it, which is wonderful. So I won't go into my background any further than that, other than to say, you know, when I was diagnosed in 2002, clearly it wasn't the best thing that have happened to me, but in many ways it was, because I certainly wouldn't have had the wherewithal or the insight to start taking a better look at the way that I was approaching my world. And as a result of that, fundamentally changed every aspect of my life. And gee, what a pleasure it is to be operating in a space where you can get in there and make a contribution to try and help this be realised for yourself, but also for others. We'll talk a little bit about ego, narcissism and altruism as we do get into the session. Does anyone like those words? I think it's part of the challenge or the key to the door around this concept. Any ego-based activity in your organisations? Anybody? No? See there's a politician down the back there. We know this might be the case. So, welcome. I thought we'd actually start picking up on one of Simon's themes. He talked about this idea of disruption. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You know what's going on out there. But when you look at this world of disruption, we are in this amazing period of change, no question. The bigger question is, are you causing the disruption or are you a victim to the disruption? And when we start to look at the different dimensions here, it's universal, not just within our organisations, within ourselves. It's actually a global, economic, organisational, society, and so on. And as we break this down a little, we can see that this is a broad-based challenge. And imagine if you put your organisational picture on or your personal picture, you'd actually see impacts of every one of these for yourself or for your family, for that matter. And we can go through each one of these and you'll see some that you could recognise. The boom-bust of the economy, the impact of the internet is obviously huge, but even issues like sector extinction. In fact, I was talking to a few people in the break around what's going on in your sector, be it in the book publishing area and so on. How do you stay ahead of that game? If we move into that space around organisations, don't we see this happening in all of our organisations? I'd be interested to measure some of that later in the session as we are going through change, transformations and so on. Society, well, where's this religion thing gone? Is it still there? I don't know. But we know this stepping back from this purist religious view into more of a spiritual view is quite interesting to see that evolving and how do we embrace that or not. But also at the individual level, what's going on here? And so, boy, there's a lot there, isn't there? What does that say? What are we doing as leaders, as individuals, as organisations to embrace and thrive through that? So, how do we relate to disruption? Who loves disruption? Can I get a bit of a show of hands? Who loves disruption? There's one down there, fantastic. This is the delusional optimist in the room, fantastic. But you can, yeah, excellent. But we know that this is for some this is awkward. In fact, for all of us, it's awkward at times. How do we get more comfortable with it? In fact, how do we lead with it? And as we start to look at this is an act of resilience. How do I move from adversity, seeing it as an adversity, to seeing it as a challenge, and ultimately to seeing disruption as an opportunity? And I know, again, in the break, talking to a number of the different people in their own sectors, they are doing very much this jumping fish experience, creating a whole new blue ocean of strategy. And when you start to unpack this, though, it comes with it a whole bunch of symptoms, both the adversity in the negative, but also the opportunity in the positive. And when we look at this idea of resilience, again, It's how I choose to view the world. For one person, it'll take you down. For the next person, out to your full potential. And this is very much this concept. So what's the key? Any guesses?
Be open.
Sorry?
Be open.
Yeah, absolutely. Be open, for sure. Listening, not only to self, but to others, for sure. Yeah.
Change your mindset.
Yeah, be able to change the mindset, flexibility of mindset, willingness to change mindset, expectation to need to change mindset. Great. So when I see a situation, there could be 10 different ways to explain that situation. Well, maybe I should explore that and get some perspective on that. Maybe talking to others will help me get that perspective. Someone over the other side here had a view? Yeah. Adaptation, agility, the ability and willingness to respond and shift the way that I've previously done things to a new way to do things. But we should always think with multiple hats: me, leader, organisation. And so a number of these things you've mentioned, humility I think is the starting point, because if we are overridden or downtrodden by ego, we're not even in the game. If our thinking is much more around the greater good, now we've got a chance of actually leaning into this space. Courage, of course, creativity, agility, as some of you have mentioned, the ability to bounce back when we take hits. I was saying to someone earlier, you don't learn or grow that much lying on the beach in Phuket. Is that fair? Has anybody been to one of these places recently? Yeah, you know, it's wonderful, do it, but you're not going to necessarily grow as a person. You actually get there by having some of these experiences. So it's actually a positive to have these experiences. And of course, we need to get the big R word up there just for the branding perspective. Cool. So, what is this thing called resilience? I want to move away from the idea that this is a bounce back concept. This is not about survival. Of course, in part, at times, this is where you'll need to play. But surely life is a little bit more than getting to your deathbed going, thank God I made it, geez, that was hard. Hope is a little bit more around, boy, that was a big, heavy, hard, challenging, fun, exciting ride. And I did try and explore lots of things. And so there's my pin-up guy for resilience, would you agree? And you probably come up with a number of others, but he really does stand the test. 27 years in prison, stayed sane, went on to change a country, arguably the world, and then did what some of the road rages in this room would struggle to relate to, and that is he had a level of forgiveness and compassion. And so our view of resilience is very much this: courage, number one. And as your organisations are going through challenge and change, do you experience courage or do you walk away? Number two is around creativity. This is the time for creativity. If you are trying to do the same thing continuously, you're actually not going to make it. This is about saying, how do we look at different ways to engage in this new world? But actually, I'd also go further to say this is not an individual sport. It's a team sport. And you talk about perspective, very much how do we move forward together is ultimately how you eventually thrive. And of course, bounce back. So bounce forward as well as bounce back. Are we happy with this definition of resilience? A broader definition than most. Any thoughts on that before I move forward?
I like how you said the bouncing back and forward, because it is that kind of dynamic in play. Sometimes one is better than the other.
Yeah, right. And so this is bouncing back and forward. It is the reality of life. Yep. To think that we're always going to be whistling down the corridor in an absolute state of delusional glee is delusional. We will take hits, and so it is both of those. But it's got to be much more around the bounce forward. So let's come forward then. I'd like to first of all address the bounce back. And this will not be the happiest part of our time together. So you're welcome to perhaps do a Sudoku now if you prefer, or whatever, but we are going to go down the dark side. It will not be pleasant. We're going there now. It starts at a pretty basic level called the confusion level. And you can see left-hand side is that team or organisational experience. Right-hand side is the individual experience. And so even at this basic level, I've got so much on my plate, priorities are changing left, right and centre, change is afoot, I don't even know what I should be doing Next, I'm feeling just a little overwhelmed. Has anybody spent any time at the confusion level of the spiral? I suspect everyone's hand should be in the air right now. Get your hands up. Next level down, I find myself going to this place of cognitive disengagement. And this is where my executive centre has hit overload. And the more information I try to take in, the more I am unable to digest it. I'm driving home at night, get into my garage, I've got no idea how I got there, let alone didn't have an accident. This is la-la land, if you want to call it that. And a person at home is talking to me, I haven't heard a word that they have said. Does anybody do this? Not a good look, there we go. Don't do this, it's really, lots of punishment comes from that. So there's cognitive failure. Next level down is emotional failure, because at this level, I've started to doubt my ability. I'm starting to withdraw. A pessimistic chit-chat is order of the day. You can imagine getting a team who's in this place. There is no performance happening here. It's no peak performance. It's certainly not sustainable peak performance. It is a conversation that is going to take us further down as a team, as individuals. Next level down. So cognitive failure, emotional failure, and now physical failure. Who's gone on holidays and got sick recently? Has anybody had this experience? And isn't this the worst thing? I worked hard, I go on holidays for this beautiful relaxation, and then I crash. Well, guess what? That's the red flag for the vulnerable level of the spiral. Whereas if I play hard, rejuvenate hard continuously, then I'm able to go off on that leave with a nice experience. Next level down, even seeing my office building appearing in the horizon is enough to send me into hyperventilation. Wake up 3 o'clock in the morning, can't get back to sleep. At this level, I feel like I'm drowning. And then the bottom of it is this place called depression. Aren't you glad you came this afternoon? But isn't this a journey? I imagine a number of you can relate to it, where you can experience this decline when you are pushing hard, things come unstuck, you don't attend to yourself sufficiently, and you can find yourself, or you'll recognise it in your team, or in the team, or in the organisation. Any comments or questions on that model? Can I invite you to have a 1-minute conversation with the person next to you? If you don't know who they are, nice time to introduce yourself. I'm so-and-so. I'd like to talk about the downward spiral with you. Some thoughts, comments or questions that came up in your conversations? Anyone happy to throw something into the room? Yes, please.
It looks very familiar from both an individual perspective and also a team perspective.
Yes.
I'm really curious to know if it's a one-way spiral.
Yeah, well,
it
absolutely isn't, but it can be if you haven't got the insight, and I think that's part of the deal. Number one bounce back strategy is to know that you need to bounce back. Now that may need to come from someone else. Programs or initiatives like Are You OK? I mean, how sensational is this, where you have got somebody who cares enough to ask that question, where as you're on your own, you actually can't see this stuff often. And so it can take that connection, back to that element of resilience called connection, to allow you to have that insight. But in terms of the return journey, it doesn't have to be as long as what got you there, because it might take 6 months to get there, right? As you're going to neglect over time, before you know it, you're getting sick on holidays and so on. So engagement of exercise, support, fixing sleep, all of these things can be changing the thinking style, can be huge parts of that acceleration north, in addition to potential medicinal support. Yeah. Okay, so look, this is one view. It is the downside view, but it's a reality view also. And so if you're looking for sustainable team performance, individual performance, organisational performance, you have to be across this as leaders and be able to coach against this if you hope to be above the line as well. It's a reality. You will have your bell curve of people in this space. All right, let's do move north. And 5 disciplines for individuals and team and organisation if you want to build your sustainable performance. The first of these is stress mastery, achieving this abiding level of calm. Who doesn't want that? Is anybody sitting here right now with an abiding level of calm? Imagine, fine. But it is achievable. And I played golf on the weekend, and my golf wasn't going too well at one point, And I really started to implement some of these principles right there and then, and said, let's not hold the baggage of the past or contemplate the score in the future. Let's just bring it back to the moment and start to slow it down with the breathing. And my performance didn't improve, but gee, I was having a much better time with it anyway. But this abiding level of calm is absolutely key if you hope to build the other elements of sustainable performance. If you haven't got this locked in, your left prefrontal cortex is shut down, your amygdala is driving the day, you are not going to be at your best by any stretch. Now Simon and I have agreed that after this session there is a optional extra for the lunch. We're heading down to the pool just down the road, and you get to experience this in practice. I imagine a number of you have done this exercise. It's one that we do in most of our training programs. All you need to do is find a 3-metre pool, tie your hands behind your back and your ankles together, and we'll just throw you into that pool. And it's very simple actually when you think about it. All you need to do is get to the bottom, gently push your way back up, come to the top, bring in the next dose of air, and blow it out enough to get yourself back down to the bottom. And you only have to do it for about 3 to 5 minutes, and then you get a bonus reward, maybe a certificate or something like that. Yes, please.
It brings up a question for me about defining calm.
Yes.
Because there has to be a kind of a tension there, but not a stress.
Yes.
And so to me that balance is understanding that actually stress is good. It's not about saying get rid of stress. It's about understanding that we're looking to move from this place of debilitating negative stress, where the challenge is so high and my perceived skill is so low that I'm falling down the spiral, to this place of positive stress where I can't wait to get out of bed to have a go at it. Is anybody there this morning? You woke up this morning, Monday morning, another week has come my way, let me at it. I know there's a few in the room. Positive stress, you want that. It gets you out of bed. And ultimately, this place of flow, where in that pool, you can just bounce up and down for 3 hours if you wanted to. Your rhythm is there, you're in the moment, you're not fretting about what might happen in the future or the past. That's the place that we're talking about. So there is that awareness, back to the awareness, of where am I up to from a biofeedback perspective. Am I going down? Am I forward? Or am I a place of equanimity? Yes, please.
To be in the right side, or we need to have like a bit of blue and a bit of ink, right?
Yeah, so do you need to spend all the time in the right-hand side? No, of course not. In fact, over here, back to the earlier point, these are places of learning, no question. But equally, this line is a line of resilience. People that are resilient spend more of their time on the right-hand side of this line. Positive stress, flow, comfort zone, and daily relaxation practice, meditation and so on. Yes, spend time here, but just not too much. It keeps you alive for sure. All right, stress mastery. We won't go into too much there in terms of meditation. Let's move up a model a little bit more. Second discipline of a resilient person is what investment do you make in energising your body? This is basic stuff. I will not spend time here. Exercise, nutrition, sleep optimisation. The stuff that's coming out on sleep at the moment is huge. Sleep Awareness Week was last week, week before. Enormous data research that's being published there. Do not miss your midnight deep sleep. Be catching that wave before 10:30. Otherwise, you will be munching on all of that sweet food the next day. There's all sorts of evidence now that talks about how do you optimise that sleep for a healthier life. Please don't miss it. Don't miss your dark chocolate or your coffee, primary ingredients for energising the body. Let's leave that behind. I think it's time to energise a little bit in the room right now. Get yourself a piece of paper. This is a timed exercise. I know some of you might struggle, particularly if you're numbers people. Who are the numbers people in the room? Must be a few, yep. So do your best, it's okay. We'll apply a handicapping system. If you are a word person, you're just going to love it. This is an anagram test. Has anybody done this with us before? There might be a few have. Yep, good. That's fine. So see if you can do better this time than last time. Good. So, anagram test. If you don't know what an anagram is, just ask the person quietly next to you. This is going to get 10 sets of scrambled letters. You need to unscramble to create one English word using all of the letters. Timed exercise, 20 seconds per word. Last rule, no cheating, talking or copying. I'll be walking around to enforce that one, but do your best. If you're sitting next to someone who looks a little dodgy, cover up your work, just to avoid any, IP theft is not a good thing. All right, so everyone ready to go? Must use all of the letters when you're unscrambling. Everyone ready? Your time, no talking, starts now. Good luck. Do your best. Good start. All right, pens down. Table number 5 over here's lost it. Didn't get breakfast, obviously. We'll come back to the score shortly. It does remind me of a quote. Leaders can be more resilient and have greater resonance when they experience optimism, hope, and compassion. As you went through that exercise, how many of you did experience optimism, hope, and compassion? Let's go through the scores. Who got 10? Didn't see it as I was wondering, but somebody might have. No? 5 or more? Who got 5 or more? Somebody? No? 4? Well done. Good job. 3? Okay, won't go any more. Didn't come here to cause humiliation or shame. So look, a bit of a challenging exercise. Clearly it was as much a resilience simulation as it was a word test. Anybody care to share their experience?
I was annoyed by your pen tapping.
What do you mean by pen tapping?
This.
What?
Yeah.
I didn't even know I was doing it. I'm sorry. It's just a habit I have. Yeah. And so you might not be the only one. Sorry, what's your name?
Roberta.
Roberta has an affliction called low frustration tolerance, often abbreviated as LFT. The smallest inconvenience just drives me batty. You must hate people eating in the cinema, I suspect, with that noisy food. It's just awful. Excellent. Anybody else? Yes, please.
If I couldn't get the word, I'd just write down what was on there with the hope that I'd come back to it eventually at some point anyway.
I think it's nice to have hope, yeah. And you know what? You're probably driving the people around you crazy because they thought you were going.
I know that one. It's reludes.
Ah, nice. Yeah, good. Thank you.
I found the very first word there quite easy and it fell out, and there was an expectation that all the others would follow.
Good. So did anyone not get coffee? Yeah, sure. And so your expectation of success was there, and then it sort of kind of went a bit like this, with little fleeting moments of joy. Excellent. Anyone else? Yes, please.
I thought it went quicker and quicker, like the second seemed to shorten. I wasn't sure, is it a trick or is it,
Yeah.
The first one was easy and therefore I had time to spare.
So don't miss this point. When we find ourselves getting corralled into a place of pressure and the related stress response to that, our perspective starts to shorten from this 270 degrees of perspective and creativity to this 35 degrees. I'm under the spotlight. I'm about to be eaten by a tiger. And it does feel like it's shortening. It was the same time all the way through. Yeah, absolutely. Good. Others? Yes, thank you.
I ended up looking for shorter words within the longer.
Nice. Change the rules. I think it's a great idea. And so this is the creativity we were talking about before with disruption. Just don't follow the rules. That's a nice thinking. Nice. How many did you get? 30? 40?
I'm not doing the right thing. I'll do what I'm supposed to do and then I got nothing.
Yeah. No, fair enough. Well, no, I applaud that. It's fantastic. Anyone else? Yes, please. Yes.
I went into oh God, everyone else is going to get this and I'm not.
Yes.
And then I went into a self-talk thing about, okay, there's a really good reason why you can't do this. And I started to, reassure myself and had all the reasons why I couldn't do it.
Okay. Good. So positive self-talk is so useful. Obviously, you want it to be realistic positive self-talk as opposed to that delusional piece again. But I think that's incredibly important because at what point do we hold on so tight to these things? And you hope you realise that was assessing your intelligence. If you did get a poor result, I'm not sure what to say to you. But and of course it wasn't. It was 10 questions of an irrelevant test, and we hold on too tight. Can we actually relax and take a objective view, try our best, but be aware that we can talk our way down this spiral if we're not careful. And if we look at some of the emotions that you experienced in this test, this idea of self-awareness, some of the emotions that you experienced, how many of them were useful? What were the useful emotions you experienced there? Calm for some, I heard calm. What else? Useful emotions.
Fun.
Fun, okay, cool. So arming your brain to work faster, you know this. I won't tell you all about my golf, but before I swing the club, I'll put a little smile on my face. It was actually something that a tennis player, I can't remember who it was, why does a tennis player, there's this one guy at the top level, he would always put a smile on his face before he received a serve. Any idea why? It wasn't to put off the opposition. It was so his brain operated faster to be able to react to whichever way that ball was going. So injecting a level of that emotion absolutely assists. What else? What other emotions do we have? Functional emotions. Sorry?
Challenge?
Yeah, challenge. And that's back to that tipping point that you were talking about before, that challenge that might have taken you into excitement, maybe trepidation, all very helpful. You weren't sort of kind of falling asleep in the exercise, you were focused and ready to go. When it hits anxiety, there's no creativity whatsoever. So, frustration would have been useful. Who was frustrated? We know some of you were. You were frustrated in a really dysfunctional sense or in a quite a bracing sense?
I was motivated to...
Motivated, yeah.
Look really closely.
I'm normally better, I can do this.
Yeah.
So, yep, fantastic. When it hits rage and, you know, it's unbelievable, I didn't come here to have to do a test, then, you know, the game's over. Who did you think it was a trick? Who thought the whole thing was a trick? You were being conned. Who thought it was? Down the back there. Oh, look at the guys down the back here. Why did you think it was a trick? I'll answer it for you. I'm intelligent. It must have been the test that was the problem. And just be careful, this is delusional optimism. Oh, you want to speak? Go on.
I may have seen it before.
You may have seen it before, okay, so you had an insight into it, okay. But it is interesting, and it was a trick. The words were coffee, satire, pagoda, regale, and rutile were the 5 words there. The rest were rubbish. All right. So this third discipline of resilience and sustainable performance is how you work with your emotions. And am I catching these emotions as they hit? So that exercise was a wonderful opportunity for self-awareness and mindfulness. Look at me. I'm experiencing panic right now. Isn't that interesting? And unless I'm actually watching that panic coming across my whole body, I am the panic, as opposed to I'm observing that panic. And unless I'm able to get into that place of looking at the emotion, I've got no chance of reframing that into a state of excitement and ultimately calm. And so we look at this idea of engaging emotions, you've got to start there. And when you look at this exercise, many of you might have done this, as you hit this state of, look at me, I'm panicking over this 10-word Enneagram test, I'm going to reframe now. Who did this? Did anybody step back and do this? I imagine there were a few of you did this. You could have actually achieved more of those words. The engagement of emotions. And you'd say, well, you know what? You look at the leaders of our big organisations, they've got this one sorted, wouldn't you agree? Yes and no. And there's lots of examples of where this isn't the case. Quite a recent one here, and you know, lots of senior leaders will occasionally find themselves in a place where their emotions aren't representing them in the best possible way. And of course we know this as the amygdala hijack, where my emotions take control and I have an outburst that I later regret. This is not operating and leading a sustainable high-performance organisation. How do we learn from our emotions, get insight from our emotions, but also regulate and control those emotions in self and in others? I think this really is a nice summary to tie around, but I think I'll move on. Gentlemen, it's just saying we do struggle with this stuff. Greg, that'd be right, yes. Ladies, you're far more, what's the word? What's that? Resilient. There you go. This is obviously not a very helpful stereotype. I think we've all got a road to run on this emotional front. At the fourth level, if I could count, is around the mind and how do I work better with my thoughts. Some would say this ultimately is where resilience occurs. Actually, it's all 5 in our view. But am I catching that thought to see whether it's a thought I wish to put into my brain. Check and change that thought if it isn't. Because when we look at a lot of our thinking, most of our thinking is actually not so useful. Can we have more resilient thinking, which is defined as, anybody? How would you classify resilient thinking? 2 words.
Positive.
Positive, called optimism, and realistic. Realistic optimism. Look at the scale of thinking styles. We try and pigeonhole it into 4. There is the melancholy pessimist, which, any lawyers in the room, before I make this next comment, can be here. You are trained and you are fantastic at finding that dark side of a situation. The pragmatic pessimist, accountants, any accountants in the room? I'm going to alienate everyone in the room. The next level, the realistic optimist, resilience, leadership, and ultimately the delusional optimist, fantastic for creativity, not so great in terms of risk management and taking a team forward. Where might you sit on that scale is an interesting check-in around this one. Yes, please.
What would you, I mean, I like realistic optimism,
yeah.
But what would you say, I've always found that if you reach for a goal that you don't think you're going to get,
yeah.
and you go towards it, you get somewhere that you never thought you'd get to anywhere. Does that make sense?
Reaching beyond your perceived level of skill.
Yeah, which is what I think what realistic optimism is about.
But I might not initially think that it's realistic where I'm going to get to.
And I think maybe this is the truer answer to this is to say resilience is about thinking style agility. So if I'm sitting down to, dream about what could be, that probably is an act of delusional optimism as I'm coming up with these plans. But at some point, as an act of leadership, I need to have a look at that from a realistic optimist perspective. The risk is you drop down to pragmatic pessimism, in which case the biggest answer you have is no, we don't want to do that, be too risky. And so it is the balance.
Can I give you any?
Please do.
Like, quite a long time ago, I was having a development discussion and I said, okay, I want to do a Harvard leadership course.
Yep.
Totally, And the organisation said, we'll come back to you. Well, that was at least optimistic. And then they said, no, we're not going to send you to Harvard, we're going to send you to Europe because one of our organisations in Europe does a leadership program. And from there, things sort of rolled on to stuff that I never thought would happen.
Yeah.
But if I hadn't said something that I thought, I dropped a stone in the pool, sort of thing, and caused a ripple.
It's definitely on the optimistic side of it. And I think we just need to be careful of this. If your thinking style is continuously delusionally optimistic, you will eventually be, respect will be hard to hold on to. Putting something out there like an aspiration, I don't think is an issue at all. It's showing that you are shooting for the stars. But you know what, you're not going to then flip to melancholy pessimism because you didn't get your way, or, you know what I mean? There's a balancing item there, I think, which is what a resilient person does, and understands what is the thinking style that I'm using for a particular context is the most important piece. And I'd say if you're talking about a sustainable, high-performing team, a leader is very much attuned to the thinking style of the team members. And if you've got a team, if you're leading a sales team who typically are delusional optimists, and they need to be, taking hits, but still going ahead, their leader needs to be keeping a nice balance on that to move forward. Equally, if you're leading a team of accountants who are typically pragmatic pessimists, there is a need to pull them up and forward. So it's a balancing act. I think it's also about choice, and we talked a little bit about this already, and in fact right at the beginning, that says when we are faced with change and disruption, we've got to be making choices. The question is, are we aware of those choices that we are making? And there's no question that there is a bunch of options. Many of us actually choose this not resilient, passive choice where we just circle the target. And we have another name for this. We call it the bitch and moan cycle. Does anybody spend some time here occasionally? I think everybody does, would that be fair? This is the sand pit, and it feels good, and I don't want to get out of it. In fact, the more I'm in it, more people join me. It's just really great. You might know some people that do this, but you can't actually move forward. A resilient person ultimately at least gets to making peace with that change. I can roll with it. It's okay. I can't change it. I will roll with it. But I'm at one with it. But ultimately, it's this one here, the ability to take positive action and say, actually, this change is something we can capitalise on as opposed to see as a detriment. Unfortunately, too many of our organisations have people that are living in this place of poisoning the pot, taking negative action. So, last discipline of a resilient person is around the spirit level. Now, I did mention this before when we talked about disruption. It's increasingly where we spend our time in organisations doing work. It's really just interesting to see how this is now hitting the stage. When we were starting in Australia, 12 years ago, it was very difficult to even mention this word because it was so confused with religion. And more we are seeing organisations wanting to extend the conversation into the ultimate place of sustainable team and organisational performance, because this is the why. And unless you can answer this, the rest of it actually doesn't make sense. In a way, you could argue the first four enable you to make choices to head towards the why at this top level. But equally, the first four, you could use them for evil as much as for that good. And so getting this top level defined, I think, is absolutely fundamental. What am I talking about here? Compassion, passion, values, trust, presence, purpose, that why, really fit into this umbrella discipline or competence that makes a difference between whether you will become or are a sustainable high-performance team and organisation, or whether you find yourself, interestingly, at the bipolar opposite called depression. So, I want to just lean into one of the disciplines here, or competencies, which is called compassion. And I'd like to say we wrote the intellectual property for this, but it's probably been around for I don't know how many thousands of years, so we're just sort of kind of, jumping on that bandwagon. But when I look at this idea of empathy, trust and compassion, to me this is almost the make or break of whether a team will be sustainably high performance or not. Why? Anybody want to answer that question? Why does this almost be the linchpin for whether a team will be that sustainable high performance team?
It becomes selfless, that the individuals become selfless.
Yeah, individuals become selfless, good. Without this, we are dealing in a transactional world. When we've got this engaged, now we're dealing in a humanity of cooperation. And so I see you as three-dimensional. I don't see you as somebody I need to get this thing done. And I know the last 100 times that we had an interaction, you sort of kind of did what you said you were going to do, and I did the same. And so I know you're a safe pair of hands, if that makes sense. Unless this is in place, very difficult to nail this top level of the journey. And so this gives you some of your options. This is a bit of a smorgasbord of choice, if you would like to call it that, of where you can play. First choice is ignorance, so don't even play here at all. Just get done with that two-dimensional thing. You know you need to get something done, just get it done. I've got no idea where that other person is up to. Another option, go for sympathy. This one's quite good because you actually increase your connections on Facebook with this one, which I think is really nice. So you get lots of people that like you. I think it's really, really a good place to be. Unfortunately, you don't over time get a lot of people that respect you. So this is very much where I overcare about the opinions and the situation of others. Okay to care, but over-caring is quite challenging and dangerous. And you see this a lot in organisations. We see it a lot in organisations where poor performance isn't dealt with in a courageous conversation. It's allowed to go on. Does it happen in your organisations? I'm not sure. You might see that. Or individual considerations override the greater good. Lots of ways you can look at that. Or does anybody have a friend who, every time you see their phone number come up on your phone, you go, oh God, there's another hour of my life lost. And I haven't quite had the conversation to say, you know what, this is not sort of kind of working. Anyway, where do resilient people, resilient leaders, resilient organisations live? They live with in this place of compassion. Having an understanding is the prerequisite for compassion. That's empathy. But you're right, when I take it on board, that is absolutely sympathy. So empathy, I'm aware, I try to be aware of what you're going through. Sympathy, I go down with you. Or I see you're rowing a boat of worries, move over, let me hop in, I'll help you row them faster. Let's build on that. What is the difference between compassion and sympathy? Anybody? Yes, please.
There's a level of separation between the individual and, let's say, the team, so you're not enmeshed. Yep. So it's almost like an outsider looking in.
Yep.
So you've got the compassion, obviously, you can see things, but it's like...
So you can see things, that's empathy. There's a level of separation, but it's not clinical separation, because at the end of the day, you can see the word at the top called care. If you want to take this to its extreme, follow the Fredrickson model, let's call that love. Obviously within a context, that I deeply care for that group, so much so that at times I'll have really tough conversations, even though at the time that person may not appreciate it. Yeah, good. Anyone else want to have a thought on this? And so as we look at this idea of sympathy versus compassion, the actual scaling here is completely wrong. If I look at our experiences in organisations, this is quite common. This is less common, but needs to actually increase significantly. And in a way, it requires a whole bunch of prerequisites, not just empathy and self-awareness, but obviously self-confidence and understanding of values and so on, because this is values-based behaviour. But if you're finding this a little bit difficult, here are your other options, much easier to go with, and don't really take into account the person, or if they do, in a negative way. Indifference is quite a good one, so that's no emotions whatsoever. Contempt, moral superiority. Does anybody know anyone that operates with contempt? You might see this, occasionally see it in professional firms and so on, but this sense of I'm sensational, you're not, and I'll dismiss, and we know that this is one of the most toxic emotions. And antipathy, bullying, prejudice, argy-bargy, it's all about me getting to the top. Sympathy, it's all about you, and compassion is all about we. Please have a conversation with the person next to you. What happens in your organisations around this model? Where do you spend time? Individually, but organisationally, what is the culture in your organisations? Clearly I wasn't serious about that breakout. It was more to tease you, because this is a conversation that's about a 3-day conversation just on this topic, right? Am I right? So I do apologise, that was more my black sense of humour. Did anybody have any interesting insights in that micro break? Yeah, please.
We were chatting, noticing that the people in the bottom part in our organizations tend to be the less resilient.
Yeah, interesting. I think that's a very interesting, you will see the thinking styles down there will not be realistic optimism at all. The thinking style that aligns to compassion is very much realistic optimism. So yes, you see it at the cognitive level, you'll see it at the emotional level. What sort of emotions do you have down the bottom there? Again, not your functional emotions. And you'll see, that's a really nice insight. Thank you, Amanda. There is a white paper on this that we can send out if you're interested in more information on this. I think it is such an important concept. So just back to this comment around organisational disruption, which we talked about there earlier. This is in a way a thumb in the air diagnostic that we are currently working on, that will become much more detailed over the next little while, around sustainable high performance organisations and teams. And you run your eyes down this list, you can say, well, where does my organisation sit around this? And I've mentioned this too many times, but there it is, right at the top there is the trust culture. Is that in place or isn't it? It really is permission to play. And you can see that the list as you move down there with yourself. I won't wander down there and read them out. When you start to look at this in terms of the opposite possibilities, that's where you start to see this continuum and this contrast that you get, and the growth that you can achieve as well. And imagine if you went down this list, you could nominate at least one opportunity that stands out for you in your organisation. Anybody happy to float that to the room? Who knows which one would be the top one that you would need to work on if you wanted to get some shift in this idea of sustainable high-performance organisation? Yes, please.
For us, it would be intense busyness. Our
Right.
BAU is just out of control.
Yeah, and when you're in that space, you know, you're in that the top level of the spiral, of that grey area, you know, very hard to liberate performance and creativity, all those things. You're running around all over the place. A good officer never runs. Yeah, challenging one. Anyone else who can nominate one of their opportunities?
I can get some moving from a knower mentality to a learner mentality.
Moving from knower to learner?
Because that means you're open to everything else that's under that yes column.
Good. So knower to learner does open up a lot of the others as well. In fact, there's a lot of overlap to some degree, because part of that is the humility piece says, actually, it's okay, and I don't get embarrassed by the fact that I'm not an expert on everything. Yes, please.
We're working on the silos.
Right.
Because,
good luck.
And we feel that that's building collaboration.
Yes.
And therefore builds trust.
Yes. Yeah, and
understanding.
Right. So the empathy, the conversations that go with that. Really great journey to be going on. All right. I think to bring this to a close, I'll make a couple of points. Number one, personally, which road are you travelling on? Do you find yourself on this high road, reaching out to your full potential, exploring opportunities, dealing with disruption, mastering change, being authentic? Or do you occasionally find yourself on this low road, fidgeting through life? I get up, I go to work, I work, I come home, I get up, I go to work, I work, I come home. My life is just a blur. Occasionally it feels like that, doesn't it? So perhaps in closing, I'll come back to the quote I started with. I'm not sure I really care how many degrees you have, how much education, training you've had, experience. At the end of the day, it's your resilience that will determine whether you step up, reach out to your full potential and be happy, or whether you go through life experiencing the sucking sound of the death spiral. It's the best close I could come up with. I hope you enjoyed the session. I wish you a resilient life.
You take a couple of questions?
Absolutely.
Anyone got some questions?
Please.
Stuart, just a question. If an organisation doesn't want to measure itself as a baseline, what does it say about an organisation?
I think there's probably a bigger conversation to have, and that conversation's got to start at the top. And in a way, maybe it's got to start with some, I hate to use the word pilot, but some intervention that actually builds in that conversation as why that might be useful to measure.
And basically wasn't believing the information. And then, so there's a lot of critique at the senior executive group that sort of said, well, can we trust it?
Yeah.
Then they moved to, well, maybe we should actually do it. Yeah. And so they didn't rely on any metrics to really measure it, where the organisation, the pulse of where the organisation's at.
Yeah.
So I guess it's probably going back to your circle earlier. The social investment model is sort of in the ignorance.
Yeah, I think that's right. And number one, there's got to be a level of trust in the tool, as you've said. And there's lots of ways to do that, and we've certainly done that with putting our tool over the ringer from a statistical perspective. But I'm not sure that's actually the issue. That's a cognitive, response to prove that you should do it. In a way, the sponsorship that's required here is much more of an emotional and a spiritual piece. And in a way, we find ourselves in conversations with clients where that sponsorship is there at the top to say, we really will benefit from creating this more as a cultural, as a culture. And that conversation about the tool becomes irrelevant. It's just one of the ways that you measure it. So to me, that's not really the challenge. It's actually the spiritual discussion that's the challenge, which you can do, but it's got to be the right person. Other questions?
Do you have any example organisations that you think are very good at this?
Yes, and in fact we would have a number of organisations that would play hard here. I'm trying to think whether I can mention. We work with a lot of the big banks and a lot of law firms in particular, and rather than mentioning specific clients. Let me tackle law firms first. When you look at the law sector, tier 1s, tier 2s, tier 3s, some of these firms you walk into and you just feel that humanity that comes with the way that they do business. Whereas the traditional law practice actually isn't that. And we know that when we see that in mental health statistics where law firms have the highest levels of depression and so on of all, other than dentists and school principals. But it's not across the board. And so there are law firms now, for example, and many that we're working with, that have said we're not playing the game that way anymore. We're doing it for the outcome, but also for the people, and taking a different approach rather than let's increase the targets and push harder and longer hours and so on. And so in each sector, I would say there's a number of firms and companies that are breaking the mould or this disruption of how we've done things in the past. And I think that's the same in the banks. And I think there is, we talked to somebody from Me Bank here today that are out there trying to break that mould of how to be more agile. So.
And is the catalyst the person at the top?
Look, reality is it shouldn't be, but actually it is. And there's lots of research there. And I think it was Goldman that did a research study that's still underway across a lot of the companies in the States that shows the direct link, or correlation at least, between leadership style and culture and organisational performance. And there's no question that the leaders that are operating with empathy-based, compassionate leadership, knock the others for six. Yeah. So no question about that. And you see when organisations change leaders as well. Yeah. Yes, please.
Yeah, I just wonder, I'm curious to also learn a bit more about how the Resilience Institute and your clients are working with our young people and young children.
Yeah.
Because I have an interest in growing my own and growing a future for them.
Yeah.
And I think this is key to some of the work, some of the learning that our little kids need.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I imagine most people in this room didn't come through a system where any of this was taught in schooling. And even more than that, I mean, when I studied engineering, I really don't remember studying anything on emotions at the time. And so this is obviously it's a growth area to bring this in much earlier. And we know that the ability to learn, it's not over for all of us, but the ability to learn this stuff is much easier when you're 5 than when you're 55. We do quite a lot of work in the education space. And, it's interesting because it is a sector that is thirsty for learning in this area. But the concepts that I've talked about today absolutely apply for kids as they do for adults, just presented in, an age-appropriate way. And even if you look at, topics like meditation, meditation, surely that's when you get to this age. Well, actually, you can start to meditate. Kids can be meditating at quite a young age and starting to get into that sort of habit. So I think it's an area that is rich for intervention, and we certainly play in the education space. If you want to talk further, Peter Sigley, who is sitting over here, is our education lead. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Stuart. Always very insightful. And if anyone would like to continue the conversation, please reach out to Deakin Prime or to Stuart, the Resilience Institute, because I look at this group and a ratio of 1.82. I reckon this group can lift a bit, Stuart. We'll get them going. So, but no, if you'd like to continue the conversation, please reach out. So we can have one more round of applause for Stuart.